My name is Phyllis, and I'm 62 years old. The phone call I received that cold Tuesday evening in November shattered my world completely. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor from across the street, was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. She told me my 8-year-old grandson Tommy had been locked outside in the backyard all day, and the temperature was dropping fast. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. Tommy is the only piece of my beloved son Mark that I have left in this world. Before I dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how karma came fast for those who hurt my precious grandson. To truly understand the horror of that November evening, I need to take you back to happier times when our family was whole and complete. My son Mark was the light of my life. He was a firefighter in our small town of Cedarville, Ohio, following in the footsteps of his late father Richard. Mark had the same gentle heart and brave spirit that made his daddy a local hero for 3 decades. When he married Sarah 12 years ago, I welcomed her into our family with open arms. She was sweet and kind, back then, always helping me prepare Sunday dinners and bringing fresh flowers whenever she visited. Tommy came into our lives when he was just 2 years old. His biological mother had abandoned him at a hospital downtown, leaving behind nothing but a tattered blanket and a note that said she could not care for him anymore. Mark and Sarah had been trying to have children for years without success. When they heard about this little boy who needed a home, they did not hesitate for a single moment. The adoption process took almost a year, but from the very first day they brought him home, Tommy was their son in every way that mattered. I still remember the afternoon Mark called me to share the news. His voice was trembling with excitement as he said, "Mama, we are going to be parents." I rushed over to their house and found Sarah holding this tiny boy with the biggest brown eyes I had ever seen. Those eyes looked straight into my soul, and I knew right then that this child was meant to be part of our family. Mark lifted Tommy into my arms, and the little boy reached up and touched my cheek with his small fingers. He did not cry or pull away. He just stared at me like he recognized me somehow, like he knew I was his grandma. From that day forward, Tommy became the center of our universe. Mark loved that boy with every fiber of his being. He taught him how to ride a bike in the driveway, how to throw a football in the backyard, and how to be brave even when thunderstorms rattled the windows at night. Every weekend, Mark would take Tommy to the fire station and let him sit in the big red truck. The other firefighters adored Tommy. They called him Little Chief and gave him his own tiny helmet with his name printed on the front. Our family dinners every Sunday were the highlight of my week. Mark would fire up the grill and make his famous barbecue ribs while Tommy helped me prepare the potato salad in the kitchen. The boy had inherited his father's patience and attention to detail. He would carefully measure each ingredient, stirring the pot with such concentration that it made my heart swell with pride. Sarah would set the table with my mother's good china, and we would all sit together under the big oak tree in my backyard and talk about our weeks. Those were golden days I thought would last forever. Mark was not just a good father. He was a good man through and through. He volunteered at the local soup kitchen every Thanksgiving. He coached Tommy's Little League baseball team, even though he worked 60-hour weeks. He called me every single day just to check in and make sure I was doing all right. After Richard passed away from a heart attack, Mark stepped up and became the man of both households. He mowed my lawn, fixed my leaky faucets, and never let me feel alone for a single moment. Everything changed on a rainy October night 2 years ago. Mark was working the night shift when a call came in about a house fire downtown. A young mother was trapped on the third floor with her 2 small children. The flames were spreading fast, and the stairwell had already collapsed. Mark's partner injured his ankle trying to get through the debris, so Mark went in alone. He managed to reach the mother and children and lead them to a window where other firefighters pulled them to safety on a ladder. But as Mark was making his way back down, a burning beam collapsed from the ceiling and struck him on the head. I got the call at 2:17 in the morning. The fire chief's voice was gentle, but broken, as he told me my son was gone. I collapsed on my kitchen floor and screamed until my throat was raw. My beautiful boy was only 38 years old. He had given his life to save strangers, and now he was never coming home. The funeral was held on a Wednesday, exactly 1 week after the accident. Half the town showed up to pay their respects. The mayor gave a speech about heroism and sacrifice. The fire department gave Mark a full honors ceremony with bagpipes and a flag-draped casket. But none of it mattered to me. My son was dead and no amount of praise or ceremony could bring him back. Sarah seemed devastated at first. She cried on my shoulder and told me she did not know how she would go on. I promised her that we would get through this together, that I would always be there for her and Tommy, no matter what. I meant every word. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs that I missed in my grief. Sarah started changing about 3 months after Mark's funeral. The first thing I noticed was the drinking. She would have a glass of wine with dinner, then 2 glasses, then half a bottle. I tried to talk to her about it, but she snapped at me and told me to mind my own business. She said I did not understand what she was going through, even though I had lost my son just as surely as she had lost her husband. The second thing I noticed was the new man. His name was Brandon, and he worked at the auto shop on the other side of town. Sarah met him when she took Mark's old truck in for repairs about 6 months after the funeral. Within weeks, she was spending every evening at his apartment. Within 2 months, he had moved into her house. The house that Mark had built with his own 2 hands. The house where Tommy had taken his first steps. I tried to be understanding at first. I told myself that Sarah was lonely and scared, that she needed someone to lean on, that Brandon might be good for her and for Tommy. But it did not take long for me to realize that something was very wrong. Brandon did not like Tommy. That was obvious from the very beginning. He would ignore the boy completely when I came to visit. He would not look at him, would not speak to him, would not acknowledge his existence. And Sarah, the woman who had once loved Tommy like her own flesh and blood, started treating him differently too. The first time I saw it with my own eyes, I told myself I must be imagining things. Tommy was playing with his trucks in the living room when Brandon came home from work. The boy accidentally knocked over a lamp and it shattered on the hardwood floor. Before I could react, Brandon grabbed Tommy by the arm and yanked him to his feet. He called him a stupid little brat and told him to clean up the mess. Sarah stood in the doorway and watched without saying a word. I waited until Brandon left the room, then pulled Sarah aside and asked her what was going on. She shrugged and said Tommy needed to learn to be more careful. She said Brandon was not used to having kids around, that they were all still adjusting to the new situation. Her eyes were cold in a way I had never seen before. Things only got worse from there. Every time I visited, I noticed something new that made my stomach turn. Tommy's clothes were always dirty and too small. His hair was never brushed. He had lost weight and his cheekbones were becoming too prominent in his little face. When I asked him if he was eating enough, he would not meet my eyes. He would just shrug and say he was fine. I brought it up with Sarah multiple times. I told her I was worried about Tommy. I offered to take him for weekends or even have him stay with me for a while so she could focus on her new relationship. But Sarah shut me down every time. She said I was being paranoid. She said I was trying to interfere with her family. She told me that if I could not be supportive, maybe I should stop coming around so much. Then 6 months ago, Sarah called me with news that made my blood run cold. She and Brandon were getting married, and they wanted to adopt a baby together. A new baby, their own baby. And Tommy, she said, was not fitting into their new life the way they had hoped. She asked me if I would consider taking him permanently. I was overjoyed at first. Of course I would take my grandson. I loved that boy more than life itself, and the thought of having him safe under my roof filled me with relief. But before I could even respond, Sarah changed her mind. Brandon had apparently talked to a lawyer who told them that giving away the adopted child might look bad in their adoption paperwork for the new baby. So they decided to keep Tommy after all. I should have fought harder. I should have called Child Protective Services right then. I should have done something, anything to get that boy out of that house. But I was afraid. Afraid of losing access to Tommy altogether. Afraid of what Sarah might do if I went behind her back. Afraid of making things worse instead of better. So I stayed quiet. I visited as often as Sarah would allow, which became less and less frequent. I brought Tommy presents and tried to make our time together as happy as possible. I told myself that he was safe, that things were not as bad as they seemed, that Sarah would never truly hurt her own child. I was wrong. I was so terribly, terribly wrong. The phone call from Mrs. Patterson came on a Tuesday evening in early November. The temperature had dropped below freezing for the first time that season, and I was sitting by the fire reading a book when my phone rang. Mrs. Patterson was one of Sarah's neighbors, a kind woman in her 70s who had known our family for years. Her voice was shaking as she told me what she had seen. She said she had looked out her window that afternoon and noticed something moving in Sarah's backyard. At first, she thought it was a stray dog, but when she looked closer through her binoculars, she realized it was Tommy. He was curled up inside the old wooden doghouse that Mark had built for their golden retriever, Max, years ago. Max had passed away the previous winter, and the doghouse had been sitting empty ever since. But now my grandson was inside it, shivering in the cold. Mrs. Patterson said she watched for over an hour thinking surely Sarah would call him back inside. But no one came. When the sun started to set and the temperature dropped even further, she decided to call me. She did not want to get involved, she said, but she could not just sit there and watch a child freeze to death. I grabbed my coat and my car keys without saying a word. The drive to Sarah's house normally took about 20 minutes, but I made it in 12. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely keep them on the steering wheel. My mind was racing with horrible images, each one worse than the last. When I pulled up to the house, all the lights were on inside. I could see the flickering glow of a television through the living room window. Sarah's car was in the driveway, as was Brandon's truck. They were home. They were inside where it was warm and comfortable, while my grandson was outside in the cold. I did not bother knocking on the front door. I went straight around to the backyard, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The grass was wet with frost, and my breath came out in white clouds as I made my way toward the doghouse in the corner of the yard. And then I saw him. Tommy was curled up on a pile of old newspapers inside that tiny wooden structure. His coat was thin and ragged. His shoes had holes in them, and clutched in his small trembling hands was a metal bowl filled with what looked like dry kibble. Dog food. My grandson was eating dog food. I fell to my knees in the frozen grass, unable to believe what my eyes were showing me. Tommy looked up at me with those big brown eyes, and I saw no surprise in them. Just exhaustion, just defeat, just the hollow expression of a child who had given up on being rescued. "Grandma," he whispered. His voice was so small and fragile that it broke my heart into a million pieces. "Grandma," Sarah said, "I'm not family. She said I do not belong in the house anymore. She said this is where animals sleep, and I'm no better than an animal." I could not breathe. I could not think. All I could do was reach into that doghouse and pull my grandson into my arms. He was so cold. His little body was shaking uncontrollably, and his lips had a bluish tint that terrified me. I held him against my chest and rocked him back and forth, trying to warm him with my own body heat while tears streamed down my face. "How long?" I managed to ask. "How long have you been out here?" Tommy hesitated, as if he was afraid to tell me the truth. "Since last night," he finally admitted. "Brandon said I was too loud during dinner, and Grandma Sarah said I needed to learn my lesson. They made me sleep out here. They said maybe I would learn to appreciate being inside if I spent some time with the real animals." My blood turned to ice in my veins. My grandson had spent an entire night and day outside in freezing temperatures, with nothing but a thin coat and dog food to eat. The people who were supposed to protect him, the woman who had promised to love him as her own, had treated him worse than a stray dog. In that moment, something inside me snapped. A rage unlike anything I had ever felt before surged through my body. I wanted to march into that house and confront Sarah and Brandon. I wanted to scream at them until my voice gave out. I wanted to call the police and have them arrested and thrown in jail where they belonged. But I looked down at Tommy's frightened face and I knew that was not what he needed right now. He needed to be warm, he needed to be fed, he needed to feel safe for the first time in months. My revenge could wait, my grandson could not. I lifted Tommy into my arms and carried him around the side of the house to my car. He was so light, too light. A boy his age should not be this easy to carry. I buckled him into the back seat and turned the heater on full blast. Then I pulled out of the driveway without looking back. I did not say a single word to Sarah. I did not knock on her door. I did not give her the satisfaction of knowing that I had found out what she had done. I just took my grandson and left. The drive back to my house felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Tommy fell asleep almost immediately, his small body finally able to relax in the warmth of the car. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and one hand reaching back to touch his knee just to reassure myself that he was really there, that I had really gotten him out of that nightmare. When we arrived at my house, I carried Tommy inside and laid him on the couch in my living room. I covered him with 3 blankets and turned up the thermostat as high as it would go. Then I went to the kitchen and made a pot of chicken soup from scratch using the same recipe my mother had taught me when I was a little girl. Mark had loved this soup when he was sick. I hoped it would bring Tommy the same comfort. While the soup was simmering on the stove, I sat beside my grandson and examined him more closely. What I saw made me sick to my stomach. His arms were covered with bruises, some old and yellow, some fresh and purple. There was a cut above his left eyebrow that looked like it had not been cleaned properly. His fingernails were broken and dirty, and his hair was so matted that it would probably need to be cut rather than brushed. I took out my phone and started taking pictures. Every bruise, every cut, every sign of neglect. I documented everything with dates and descriptions, knowing that I would need evidence when I went to the authorities. This time, I was not going to stay quiet. This time, I was going to fight for my grandson with everything I had. When Tommy woke up, I fed him the soup slowly, 1 spoonful at a time. He ate like he had not had a proper meal in days. When he finished the first bowl, he asked for another, and then another. I let him eat as much as he wanted, watching him with tears in my eyes. Between bites, Tommy started telling me about the past few months. His voice was quiet and hesitant, as if he expected to get in trouble for speaking the truth. But I encouraged him, gently promising him that he was safe now, that no one was ever going to hurt him again. He told me that things had gotten really bad after Sarah and Brandon got engaged. They started talking about him like he was not even in the room. They said he was a burden, a mistake, a reminder of a past they wanted to forget. They stopped buying him new clothes when he outgrew his old ones. They stopped packing him lunch for school. They started locking him out of the house after dinner and not letting him back in until bedtime. The doghouse started about a month ago, Tommy said. Brandon said I needed to earn my place in the family. He said real children help around the house and do not complain. But no matter how hard I tried, nothing was ever good enough. So they said I could sleep outside until I learned to be grateful. I could barely contain my rage as I listened to my grandson describe his abuse. But I kept my voice calm and soothing, not wanting to scare him. I told him that none of this was his fault. I told him that he was a good boy, the best boy, and that he deserved to be loved and cherished. I told him that he was never going back to that house as long as I had breath in my body. That night, I tucked Tommy into my guest bedroom, the room that had once been Mark's when he was growing up. I read him 3 stories and sang him the same lullaby I used to sing to his father. When he finally fell asleep, I kissed his forehead and whispered a promise. I'm going to fix this, sweetheart. I'm going to make everything right. The next morning, I woke up early and got to work. My first call was to Margaret Henderson, a family law attorney who had helped me with my will after Richard passed away. I explained the situation and sent her the photographs I had taken of Tommy's injuries. She was horrified and agreed to take the case immediately, waiving her usual retainer fee because she said no child deserved to be treated that way. My second call was to Child Protective Services. I spoke with a social worker named Patricia, who listened to everything I told her with growing concern. She said she would open an investigation right away and that she would need to interview Tommy as soon as possible. She also said that based on what I had described, there was a very good chance I could be granted emergency custody. My third call was to the police. I filed a report for child abuse and neglect, providing them with Mrs. Patterson's contact information as a witness. The officer who took my statement was a young man who had gone to high school with Mark. He remembered my son remembered the hero he had been. He promised me that he would make sure this case got the attention it deserved. By noon, I had set everything in motion. The wheels of justice were turning. And Sarah was about to find out that karma does not need years to catch up with you. Sometimes it arrives the very next morning. Around 2 in the afternoon, Sarah called my phone. I let it ring 5 times before answering, wanting to savor the moment. "Where is Tommy?" she demanded. Her voice was shrill and panicked. "We came home last night and he was gone." "What did you do?" I kept my voice perfectly calm as I responded. "I found him in your doghouse, eating dog food. I found my grandson covered in bruises, half-starved and terrified of his own mother. So I took him home with me where he belongs." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Sarah started screaming. She called me names I will not repeat. She accused me of kidnapping. She threatened to call the police and have me arrested. "Go ahead," I told her. "Call the police." I already did. And I also called Child Protective Services and my lawyer and everyone else who needs to know what you have been doing to that boy. So by all means, Sarah, make that call. I will be waiting. I hung up before she could respond. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Tommy was interviewed by a social worker and a police detective, both of whom were gentle and patient with him. He told them everything, answering their questions with a bravery that made me proud beyond words. He even showed them where the worst bruises were, lifting his shirt to reveal marks on his back that I had not seen before. The investigation moved quickly. Sarah and Brandon were brought in for questioning. Brandon, true to form, tried to throw Sarah under the bus. He claimed he had nothing to do with how Tommy was treated, that it was all her idea. But the evidence said otherwise. Neighbors had seen him yelling at Tommy in the front yard. Tommy's teacher had reported suspicious bruises months ago, but nothing had been done. And Mrs. Patterson gave a statement describing everything she had witnessed. Within a week, I was granted emergency custody of Tommy. Within a month, Sarah's parental rights were terminated by the court. She did not even bother to show up for the final hearing. I heard later that she and Brandon had broken up, that he had moved to another state to avoid any potential criminal charges. She was left alone in that house that Mark had built, surrounded by the ghosts of the family she had destroyed. I watched from my living room window as the unmarked sedan pulled up to Sarah's house on a grey Thursday morning. 2 officers in plain clothes stepped out and walked up to the front door. I could not hear what they said, but I saw Sarah's face through the window when she opened the door. The color drained from her cheeks, and her mouth fell open in shock. They handed her papers, official documents that stripped away every ounce of authority she thought she had over my grandson. Her hands were shaking as she read the words, and even from a distance I could see her lips moving as she tried to comprehend what was happening. Tommy was sitting at my kitchen table eating pancakes when I walked back inside. He looked up at me with syrup on his chin and a smile on his face. That smile was something I had not seen in months, and it filled my heart with a warmth I cannot describe. "Grandma," he said, "can I have more chocolate chips?" I laughed and sprinkled extra chocolate chips on his pancakes, just the way his father used to like them. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Sarah, not Brandon, not any of the darkness we had survived. The only thing that mattered was this beautiful boy and the new life we were building together. The court proceedings moved faster than I had expected. Margaret, my attorney, said it was because the evidence was so overwhelming. She had never seen a clearer case of child abuse in her entire career. The judge was an older woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed all the photographs, read all the statements, and listened to the testimony from social workers and teachers. When she delivered her verdict, her voice was firm and unwavering. This court finds that the respondent, Sarah Miller, has failed in her fundamental duty to protect and nurture the minor child in her care. Based on the evidence presented, this court grants full and permanent custody of Tommy Miller to his grandmother, Phyllis Henderson. I burst into tears right there in the courtroom. Tommy, who had been sitting beside me holding my hand, threw his arms around my neck and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. We had won. After everything Sarah had put us through, we had won. But the karma did not stop there. Within weeks of the custody ruling, Sarah's life began to fall apart in ways I could never have imagined. Brandon left her for a younger woman he met online. Her employer, a local insurance agency, let her go after learning about the child abuse investigation. The neighbors who had once been friendly to her stopped speaking to her altogether. She became a pariah in our small town, whispered about in grocery stores and avoided at community events. I heard from Mrs. Patterson that Sarah started drinking heavily again. She lost the house because she could not keep up with the mortgage payments. The last anyone saw of her, she was loading boxes into a rental truck, heading somewhere far away where no one knew her story. I wish I could say I felt sorry for her. I wish I could say I found forgiveness in my heart for the woman who had married my son. But every time I look at the scars on my grandson's arms, every time I remember finding him in that doghouse eating dog food, the only thing I feel is a cold satisfaction that justice was served. It has been 15 years since that terrible November night when I found Tommy in the doghouse. He is 23 years old now, a young man with his father's courage and his grandmother's stubborn determination. He graduated from the fire academy last spring, following in the footsteps of the father he barely remembers. The day I watched him receive his badge and helmet was the proudest moment of my life. Tommy still lives with me, though he talks about getting his own apartment soon. I tell him there is no rush, that this house is as much his as it is mine. We have our routines now. Sunday dinners under the oak tree in the backyard. Morning coffee on the front porch while we watch the sunrise. Movie nights on the couch with popcorn and old classics that Mark used to love. Sometimes Tommy asks about Sarah. He wants to know where she is, what happened to her, whether she ever felt sorry for what she did. I tell him the truth, that I do not know and I do not care. She made her choices, and she has to live with the consequences. That is not our burden to carry. The fire department threw a ceremony last month to honor the 15th anniversary of Mark's death. Tommy stood at the podium and gave a speech about his father that brought the entire room to tears. He talked about sacrifice and courage and love. He talked about what it means to be a hero, not just in moments of danger, but in the everyday choices we make to protect the people we care about. When he finished, he looked directly at me in the front row and said, "My grandmother is the real hero in my story. She saved me when no one else would. She fought for me when everyone else had given up. She showed me what unconditional love looks like, and she taught me that family is not about blood. It is about who shows up when everything falls apart." I cried so hard I could barely breathe. Tommy came down from the podium and wrapped his arms around me, the same way he had done when he was 8 years old and terrified and cold in that courtroom. Only now he was the one holding me up, the one promising that everything would be all right. We burned that doghouse together on the 1-year anniversary of his rescue. We doused it with lighter fluid and set it ablaze, watching the flames consume every piece of wood that had once been his prison. Tommy held my hand as we watched, and when the last ember died out, he turned to me with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Grandma," he said. "Thank you for coming back for me." I pulled him close and kissed the top of his head the way I used to when he was small. "I will always come back for you, sweetheart. Always." People ask me sometimes how I found the strength to fight for my grandson. They want to know how I kept going when everything seemed hopeless. The answer is simpler than they expect. Love does not give up. Love does not back down. Love does exactly what needs to be done, no matter how hard or how scary or how painful. And karma, well, karma has a way of finding those who hurt the innocent. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes it takes decades. But in our case, it came fast. It came the very next morning after I took Tommy away from that house of horrors. Sarah woke up that morning to find her life crumbling around her. The police were at her door. The social workers were opening investigations. The neighbors were whispering behind her back. And her grandson, the boy she had treated worse than a dog, was safe and warm and loved in his grandmother's arms. That is the power of standing up for what is right. That is the power of protecting the ones who cannot protect themselves. And that is the lesson I hope you take from this story. If you see a child being hurt, do something. If you know something is wrong, speak up. Do not wait for someone else to fix it. Do not assume that things will get better on their own. Because sometimes the only person standing between a child and a lifetime of suffering is you. If this story touched your heart, I would love to hear from you in the comments below. What would you have done if you found your grandchild in that situation? Have you ever had to fight for someone you love against impossible odds? Share your thoughts and let us start a conversation. If you believe every child deserves to be loved and protected, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps these stories reach more people who might be going through something similar. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. And please share this video with your friends and family. You never know who might need to hear these words today. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this community. May your family always be filled with love, warmth, and the courage to protect each other no matter what comes your way. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Until next time.